Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China has officially further relaxed its family planning policy for couples who want to have a third child. But high living costs and the host of pressure could deter Chinese people from extending their families. So how will this policy shift work? What worries young people most? And what concrete policies can address the challenges faced by Chinese men and women when it comes to having a family? To discuss all these topics and more, I'm joined by James Leung, co-founder of Trip.com Group. He's also a research professor of applied economics at Peking University's Guanghua School of Management. Later on, we'll be talking to Ms. Zhao Miao, partner of KPMG Legal Network Shanghai firm, and also Professor Zhang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. That's our topic. I'm Wang Guan. So James, welcome to CGTN.
It's a pleasure.
So this new policy encouraging Chinese young couples to have 3 children has apparently set off fierce debate and discussions on Chinese social media. Many Chinese, young people in particular, say, they're middle-class wage earners, they're working class, they don't come from privileged families. They simply cannot afford to have 1 baby, let alone 3. Are their voices being heard, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, these voices are certainly heard, and the government in their announcements already said there will be other supporting measures to be implemented in the future to reduce the cost of raising children. But these policies, take some time to design and implement these policies, and people's expectations are high. I wouldn't say it's complaints, but people are very eager and have high expectations for these policies.
Along with the new policy, Beijing says they will have supporting measures, including lowering costs for education, for childcare, providing incentives for Chinese couples to have more babies. But to be honest, I didn't pick up too many detailed measures yet. What specific supporting measures, in your opinion, as a scholar in Chinese demographics for a long time, do you think is needed right now to incentivize Chinese couples to have more babies?
To raise fertility significantly, it's a very difficult problem. Actually, it's a problem for the world, not just for China. Many countries have tried different measures, and China can learn the successful lessons from many other countries. Usually it's not one policy, it's a comprehensive set of policies. Tax exemption, cash and tax exemption, housing subsidy, daycare centers, and various measures to support the female to balance career and raising children. Many policies. I would say some of them are very difficult. Some of it takes time. The daycare centers probably takes a year or 2 to build. Tax exemptions, it's a very complicated financing and public finance problem. It takes some time to develop. Housing subsidy, I think because of the housing price in China in major cities are such a high burden for couples, I think this is relatively imminent or relatively easy to implement too. That's one policy I have a high expectation. What I propose is that for cities with high housing price can give discount to couples with 1 children, 2 children, 3 children, the various level of discounts.
How exactly should the prices be tiered?
Yeah, for example, couples with 1 kid can get a 10% off, with 2 children get 30% off, and with 3 children with half or 50% off of the housing price. Well, the reason that I think this is quite doable because those cities are first of all is pretty rich, and they collect a lot of revenue from selling apartments or land quota anyway. So by giving back some of the, usually the housing price in those cities, most of them, more than half of the housing cost is actually tax collected by the government by selling the land. If those governments can have the permission from the central government to increase the land quota for housing, then they can more than make up their lost revenue from those subsidies. So actually this, from a financial point of view, is quite doable. And it will be a big incentive for the couples in those cities to have more children or have ideal number of children. Yeah.
As a Chinese millennial, the plan sounds great to me, although it's not up to me to make the call. On the other hand, some Chinese young people joked on the internet saying that the future will be one where there are one couple who are both the only child, taking care of their 4 elderly parents, plus 3 kids and 9 grandkids, and more years at work until retirement. Is that a legitimate concern?
Well, that's certainly the ideal government, the family formation that the government ideally wants couple to have. But in reality, only a small number of young couples will have 3 kids. If the young couple have children when they were still young, like in their 30s, their parents is still in their 50s or 60s. So are still relatively healthy. So I think if they have the children when they were young, they probably can have their grandparents, their parents to take care of their children as grandparents. So that can lend a helping hand. If they, have their second, third children when they were 40, then you run into this problem. You have to both supporting the old at the same time have to support the young children. So this is actually my advice is for the young couple is to have the children when they were still young in their 30s, not wait until their 40s.
Well, people are hard to be convinced these days, especially when it comes to dating and getting married. So let's talk about the women, and it is still largely women who are bearing the responsibility of raising children. Do you think, the society has provided women with enough support, and what additional support should there be if, women were to have more babies?
Well, certainly not nearly enough now. Women in China usually have high level of education, just like many other developed countries. And the women also are high achievers, so they have high expectation for their career as well, especially if the woman is a single child for the family. So they all have a very hard time balance the family and career. And a lot of social programs or social engineering can be done to alleviate this burden. For example, daycare centers, daycare centers I think crucial. Currently, only 4% of the children are in one government-supported daycare centers. And some of the developed countries, like Scandinavian countries, they have almost half of their children in the daycare centers. So China has a long way to go to build up the supply of daycare centers. That will certainly help. The other thing is I always advocate to the companies can have a more flexible working routine, like allow women, allow couples, or allow everybody to work from home or the flexible schedule. So this is something I think, especially post-COVID, I think it's very much doable because people are used to the virtual tools, meetings over internet, and the network and facility are getting a lot better. So I hope this is something that can be become widespread, basically working from home that will certainly help for women to balance their career and family a little bit. The other big problem for China and for other East Asia countries that the marriage ratio has been dropping quite rapidly. And a lot of women, especially in large cities, remain single. You know that China has an imbalanced sex ratio. There are more men than women. But in major cities, the high achieving women, highly educated women have a hard time to find mate. And that's
many guys will say they're too hard to handle, on the other hand. But, for guys,
Yeah.
that was what I'm going to ask you next. For guys in China, they say they usually are expected to have a house and a car and a big wedding gift to be able to find a wife. It is cultural. Many say it is in the DNA of the Chinese families, wedding rituals. And the government said they're going to change that. But how do you think that can be reversed or changed, by the government?
This is a cultural issue. This is a kind of the conventional thinking or the inertia of conventional thinking. Actually, just a generation ago, men usually make more money and more highly educated. So it's actually natural for women to expect their couple or their spouse to have higher education and earn more money. But just shortly, one generation later, this has completely reversed the social pattern that women now have more women have college degrees, and so women are more highly educated than men now, and a lot of women have higher positions or earn more money than men. So if every woman still have the conventional thinking that they expect to find a higher earning spouse, it just cannot be done. So this is takes some education or takes something getting used to. But I think from the experience of other developed countries and the East Asian countries, they have a hard time to change this conventional thinking. But in the U.S., other Western nations, I think it becomes more accepted that the woman can earn more than the man in the family. So I think this culture can be changed as long as we giving the government and the society will become advocating this kind of a family where woman is more able and men will take more responsibility for the housework. So that's something I can expect it will change quickly.
James Leung, Chairman and co-founder of CTRIB, also a research professor of applied economics at Peking University. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back. Professor Gong, let me go to you first. The new policy announcement, ignited lively discussions and debate on Chinese social media. Many young Chinese couples say, they're reluctant to even have one baby, let alone three. Do you feel for them?
Well, I can understand where they're coming from. I think this policy it may not be really targeting people having 3 children. More likely is setting the stage for coming up with some kind of encouraging or preferential treatment policies, so as to just encourage people to have more children, or at least 1 or 2. So I think there's a policy background behind it, but I can certainly understand young people's concern. And I think this is a general trend in developed countries towards having less children. And this is mostly motivated by the fact that children are no longer regarded as a hedge or means of getting, providing care when people get old. In the old days, people raised children mostly for that purpose. But in modern society, especially when social networks are better prepared for that kind of situation when we get old, there's a less need for that. And another thing you have mentioned is that the cost of raising children has been very high, especially in first-tier cities in China. And a lot of young people think that they can live by without having any children. Sometimes some of them actually think they don't even need a marriage anymore, like what we're seeing in Japan, South Korea.
Yeah, two of the biggest headaches among many that the Chinese couples complain about are, number one, skyrocketing property prices in big cities, and number two, the costs of raising the children, including their education costs. So, Professor Gong, let me stay with you. How do you think the government of China can really address those two issues, property prices and the costs of raising a child?
I think the Chinese government definitely understands this very well. I think the fact that this policy is rolled out is precisely targeted at coming up with some policies to address these concerns. I think what the government can do, for example, is to provide affordable housing for people who have more children, and also in China, education opportunities are really scarce, and in that regard, the government can certainly influence at least the national universities in terms of providing some preference incentives for people who have the second child or third child. We start with the third child first, I guess, because the total number of people fitting into that category will not be a lot, so not going to be overwhelming the current system. So I think this is definitely something that the government is thinking about. I think we're definitely moving in that direction.
Ms. Zhao, along with the announcement of relaxing its family planning policy, we've also heard from the Chinese government saying that they will have supporting measures to support young Chinese couples to have more babies. What specific supporting measures do you most expect to see?
Well, basically based on the experiences from other countries who actually enacted similar kind of measures, I would expect something like direct financial subsidies. Potentially that can also come across as many forms, such as tax deductions possibly, and maybe just cash compensations or a cash disbursement. It can also come in the forms of maybe subsidized mortgage rates, or even subsidies in, say, purchase a seven seats car or vehicle for the family who actually have more children, such as 3 children.
Well, our previous guest, James Leung, was once quoted as saying that the government should perhaps think about awarding up to 1 million yuan in various forms, tax deductions, mortgages, tax exemptions, and so on and so forth, to give Chinese young couples in order for them to have more babies. What would be, your estimate of how much, in terms of money amount, those incentives should be?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult. However, I think kind of direct money compensation will help in the short run to boost kind of the willingness to have more children. I think that's kind of for certain. But then the demand is really, it's both science and also magic.
All right, fair enough. Professor Gong, let me turn to you first and talk about the grievances or concerns of both Chinese men and Chinese women who are now encouraged to have more babies. For Chinese men, sometimes they complain that the cultural norms, the wedding norms are really against them. It's better that they have a property in big cities and a car and a big fat wedding gift in order to find a wife. And the government said those old conventions should disappear. How do you look at it? Do you think those old conventions can disappear easily?
Well, these things are mostly driven by the market, I guess. So we have to face the fact that there is a marriage market. Being trained as economists, I would view it this way. I think definitely these things are costing a big burden on young men, and this is something totally uncalled for. I think to some extent the government can do something about it, but at the end of the day, this is a very private matter. I mean, there's only a certain extent that the government can do. I have a solution for this. What you do to address these issues on a
Let me guess, immigration, right?
Yes, in free market, I guess. Free market means is that this marriage market can be global as opposed to be just local, domestically. So I'm all for it. I also want to address the Mr. Liang's assertion that the government should provide up to like $1 million for each newborn baby, additional each newborn baby. I vehemently disagree with that. I don't think this is something the government should do. I think the government can provide some incentives, some preferential policies with some limited degree. I mean, I think when the society comes to that point where you have to, pay almost $1 million to encourage people to have children, there's something wrong. Seriously, something seriously wrong about our society. I don't think we have to be too much overwhelmingly concerned about the lower birth rates. I think this is a very personal and private matter, something that's determined in people's bedroom, and we shouldn't devise this kind of a very intrusive policies get into people's bedroom. So I'm very skeptical about the effectiveness of this kind of policies, and aside from the fact that it will impose a huge fiscal burden on the government.
Yeah.
It's basically using some people's money to subsidize others, and that's not fair.
But Professor Gong, what do you think of James's other proposal, for example, housing discount? If you have one baby, 10% off, the second child, 30% off, and for the third child, you would have 50% off the property you're purchasing.
That's crazy. I mean, who's going to pay for that 50%, right? I'm actually quite agree with your previous guest about reduced mortgage rate. I think that's something that the government can bear with. It imposes a very modest burden on the government, mostly on the state-owned banks, and I think that could be a quite effective policy instrument. But when you're talking about providing real cash to people for this kind of a purpose, I'm against it. I'm always very much against this kind of a fiscal policy. It's such a direct and brutal fiscal policy. I'm not in that camp.
Okay, Ms. Zhao, let me turn to you. Chinese women have a lot of pressure in life, professionally and family-wise, marriage-wise, you name it. As a mother of 2 children, do you think the society has provided women with enough support?
I would say generally women does have more challenges in kind of satisfy both their kind of work obligation as well as family obligation. I think we have to acknowledge one of the major difference between 2 different genders would be generally for men, once they satisfy their work obligation, basically they naturally satisfy their family obligation. However, for women, that 2 jobs are just 2 jobs. You have to, on the one hand, maintain your, satisfy your work obligation. On the other side, you have to take care of all the family obligations. So in that sense, women does need more support from the society, both in terms of, generally the female job market is more demanding, based on kind of all the interruptions while women go get pregnant and go to do all these kind of childbirth as well as, caring of the kids. In addition to that, there's also this inequality within a division of family obligations between husband and wife. Generally, kind of contribution to household is not that well recognized in China. So that also can be very easily reflected in one of the very recent actually divorce proceedings where the women actually spend a lot of time in taking care of the household, being a full-time kind of housewife, and then she got kind of
that
compensated.
That should be counted towards GDP, trust me.
Yeah, that's kind of the reality. I think it takes time to change the kind of cultural gender norms. And also, you mentioned at the very beginning of this program that there's increasingly kind of high expectations from parents to children to really excel in their academic advancement. So that's another issue. moving forward, I think the policy will have to deal with in a more institutionalized way.
So, Ms. Zhao, as a career woman who's pretty successful in your career, can you explain to our viewers the kind of employment, both opportunities as well as barriers for Chinese women of childbearing and child raising years? What kind of situation are they finding themselves into these days in China?
Wow. Well, I think I can probably speak in both positions, both in terms of an employer, whereas a partner of a law firm, when I'm looking at resumes of candidates, I always try to maintain kind of very alert of not having any bias in which candidate I'm choosing. However, I think the bias of the kind of discrimination is there. For example, age discrimination. Normally, if right now I think for women in the career path, once you're kind of go beyond the age of 35, it's going to be difficult, especially things get even worse if you have one child and two children. Three, I don't think you have too much chance in getting a full-time job anymore. In addition to that, with all this maternity leave, even if right now there are some policy advocates saying that we need to kind of extend the current maternity leave for women, such as from the current like around 4 months to maybe 1 year up to 3 years, like some of the developed countries. However, that has already affected women in their career development, because from an employer perspective, that's a quite big kind of interruption in as an employer to manage its human resources or to manage its kind of workforces in the workplace. And then maybe another measure for that, another option for that one, people are saying now I think China has adopted partially that kind of option, that is to have this kind of option between husband and wife to split the maternity leave or paternity leave that the couple can enjoy, so that to kind of, to even the kind of gap or inequality caused by women actually leave for job to take care of the family or the children.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very hard work that has been done that should have been appreciated more. Professor Gong, any final thoughts on these issues?
I think one thing that's raised a very good issue here is regarding the labor law. I think encouraging people to have more children is largely about leveling the playing field between men and women in the job market. I think this is one area where the government can play a very important role in terms of legislating the conditions such that this kind of disparity can exist. For things encouraging providing adequate maternity leave, making sure there's no discrimination, no gender discrimination against women in the job market. All these things can be done quite easily without imposing a huge fiscal burden on the government. And also, I think, from a moral perspective, this is the right thing to do. We should, as a society, as a modern society, we should strive in the direction of gender equality and providing the adequate environment for women to thrive in the job market, in their career, as well as raising at least 1 or 2 children. I think this is something that we should all strive to achieve in the future. This is one very important sign of a modern and also a civilized society.
Modern Chinese family. Thank you so much, Professor Zhang Gong. Thank you as always. And Ms. Zhao, thank you so much for being part of the discussion. And also James, thank you. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Thank you for watching.